The garbage truck's hydraulics screamed to life, its steel jaws opening wide to swallow the industrial dumpster whole. Grace Thompson froze mid-step, the black trash bag slipping from her trembling fingers as a sound cut through the mechanical roar, a sound that shouldn't exist in a place of death and decay. It wasn't trash making that noise, it was something alive. The truck driver slammed the emergency stop, cursing as Grace dove toward the dumpster, her veterinary scrubs catching on rusted metal. Behind her, Eleanor Whitman dropped her binoculars from her third-floor window, the lens shattering against hardwood as her hands flew to her mouth. 40 years of FBI training hadn't prepared her for what she'd witnessed these past 6 months. Inside the soggy cardboard box marked "Donations," a pair of amber eyes met Grace's, eyes she'd seen in photographs on her dead husband's dresser, eyes that had watched over Sergeant James Thompson in Afghanistan until his final breath. "Dear God," Grace whispered, her voice breaking. "Duke?" How long had James's military dog been dying in this heat? And who could do this to a war hero? Grace Thompson had learned to live with ghosts. 3 years since James's flag-draped coffin arrived from Afghanistan, she still set his coffee mug by the maker each morning, still cooked 3 portions at dinner, though only 2 plates ever emptied. The third sat untouched, a shrine to habits that refused to die with the man who made them. At 35, she moved through life like a woman underwater, each motion deliberate and slow. The veterinary clinic she'd built with James had become her refuge, the only place where saving lives still felt possible. But even there, surrounded by healing and hope, she couldn't escape the arithmetic of loss. $47,000 in medical debt from James's final stateside treatment, bills stamped with dates that marked his body's slow surrender to wounds no surgery could repair. Their daughter Emma hadn't spoken since the funeral. 8 years old now, she communicated through drawings and gestures, her selective mutism a wall no therapist had yet breached. Grace kept every sketch, hundreds of them, all variations of the same image, a soldier and a dog standing guard beneath an endless sky. Miles away, in a house that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, Marcus Sullivan sat in what had once been his son's room. Tommy would have been 12 now, would have started middle school, would have outgrown the Star Wars bed sheets that still dressed the narrow bed. The toys remained exactly as they'd been that July afternoon 5 years ago. Action figures frozen mid-battle, Legos half-assembled, a stuffed German shepherd dog clutched in the arms of a boy who'd never wake again. Marcus had been a different man then. Chief of pediatric surgery at Phoenix Children's, hands that could repair infant hearts, a God complex justified by the lives he'd saved. Now those same hands shook as he poured his morning whiskey, the medical license revoked, the marriage ended in suicide. The blame settled deep in his bones like shrapnel. He'd bought Duke 6 months ago at a military auction, drawn by something in the dog's bearing, that rigid attention stance, that 1,000-yard stare of a soldier who'd seen too much. The seller had mentioned Afghanistan, had started to explain about the handler, but Marcus hadn't wanted stories. He'd wanted something that couldn't leave him, couldn't judge him, couldn't die because of his failures. But Duke had refused to break correctly. No matter what Marcus did, the dog maintained that maddening dignity, that quiet judgment and amber eyes that seemed to see through to every sin. From her window overlooking the industrial district, Eleanor Whitman adjusted her binoculars with hands that had once steadied rifles in Quantico. 72 years old, 15 years widowed, she'd buried 2 sons in Vietnam and a husband to Agent Orange. Now she filled her days documenting the neighborhood's secrets in leather journals, her FBI training transformed into the harmless hobby of a lonely old woman. Except what she'd documented about Marcus Sullivan was far from harmless. The Phoenix sun had turned the dumpster into a furnace. Grace's hands burned against the scorching metal as she hauled herself up and over the edge, landing hard among bags of rotting food and industrial waste. The stench hit her like a physical blow, but she pushed through it, following the sound, that weak, desperate scratching that might have been her imagination if not for Eleanor's binoculars shattering 3 stories above. The box sat wedged between 2 bags, donations scrawled across soggy cardboard in faded marker. Through a tear in the side, she glimpsed matted fur, the rise and fall of labored breathing. Her hands shook as she peeled back the cardboard, and then the world tilted. Duke lay curled in a pool of his own waste, ribs jutting through patchy fur, infected wounds weeping across his flank. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart, amber eyes that held recognition despite the glaze of fever, eyes that had looked out from every photo James had sent from Afghanistan. One paw pressed weakly against something tucked beneath him, a photograph. Water-damaged, but visible. Sergeant James Thompson in dress uniform, Emma on his shoulders, both of them laughing at something beyond the camera's view. No, no, no. Grace's veterinary training kicked in as she checked his temperature with practiced hands. The thermometer read 106.8, organ failure territory. Duke's tail twitched, the ghost of a wag, and a sound escaped his throat that might have been acknowledgement, or goodbye. "I've got you," she whispered, gathering his emaciated frame against her chest, 60 pounds of muscle and loyalty reduced to barely 30. "I've got you, soldier." The truck driver was shouting something about schedules and liability, but Grace was already running. Her 10-year-old Honda sat baking in the clinic lot, and she laid Duke across the back seat, his head in her lap, as she drove one-handed through red lights and stop signs. His breathing grew more labored with each block, a rattling wheeze that she'd heard too many times in dying animals. "Stay with me," she commanded, the same word she'd whispered to James in the hospital. "That's an order, Duke. You stay with me." The veterinary clinic materialized through her tears, and she burst through the doors like a woman possessed. Dr. Martinez looked up from paperwork, his expression shifting from surprise to professional concern as he saw her burden. "Grace, this dog is— Clear the surgery." She was already moving toward the treatment room. "Get me an IV, lactated ringers, start antibiotics." "Grace," Martinez caught her arm. "Look at him. Really look, his temperature alone. This is James's dog." The words tore from her throat. "This is James's dog." Martinez stepped back, something in her face stopping further argument. They worked in synchronized silence, years of partnership allowing them to move without words. 4 lines threaded into collapsed veins, oxygen mask secured over Duke's muzzle, cooling pads arranged around his burning body. That's when Emma appeared in the doorway. Grace's heart seized. Her daughter never came to the clinic, not since the day they'd learned about James. But there she stood in her school uniform, backpack sliding off one shoulder, eyes wide as she took in the scene. The school must have called when Grace didn't pick her up, another failure in a day full of them. Duke's eye, the one not swollen shut, tracked to the child. His tail impossibly moved again. Not a twitch this time, but a deliberate wag, weak but unmistakable. Emma stepped forward as if pulled by an invisible string, and Duke made a sound Grace had never heard from any dog, part whine, part sigh, part recognition. Emma's hand reached out, trembling, and touched Duke's paw. The EKG spiked, then flatlined. "He's coding." Martinez grabbed the crash cart while Grace started compressions, counting out loud as she'd done 1,000 times before. But this wasn't just any patient. This was Duke, who'd kept vigil over James's body for 72 hours in the Afghan desert. Duke, who'd saved 14 lives according to the citations James had hidden in his footlocker. Duke, who somehow knew Emma despite never meeting her. "Come on," Grace pleaded between compressions. Come back! Come back!" The monitors stayed silent. 30 seconds, 60. Martinez met her eyes, the question unspoken. Emma hadn't moved, her hand still on Duke's paw, tears streaming down her face in absolute silence. Then Duke gasped. The monitors erupted back to life, weak but steady. Duke's eye found Emma again, and his tail moved once more. Emma's mouth opened, and for a moment Grace thought, hoped, prayed, but no sound came. Just tears and a smile that broke Grace's heart all over again. 3 floors up and 2 blocks over, Eleanor Whitman sat at her kitchen table, hands steady now, as she opened the first of 47 leather journals. 6 months of documentation started the day she'd watched Marcus Sullivan bring Duke home. She'd recognized the dog's military bearing immediately. Harold had trained military dogs before Vietnam claimed their sons. She'd watched Duke's systematic breaking, documented each session, each escalation, each moment Marcus crossed from discipline into cruelty. She'd stayed silent because that's what old women did, minded their business, kept their windows closed and their mouths shut. But she'd heard Duke's screams at 3 a.m., seen the blowtorch Marcus thought darkness would hide, witnessed the systematic destruction of something noble. She'd written it all down in her precise FBI script, sketched what her failing eyes could capture, recorded sounds on her ancient cassette player when the nights grew too terrible for silence. Now, flipping through pages of evidence, Eleanor made a decision. She reached for her phone, the landline because she'd never trusted cell phones, and dialed a number she hadn't used in 15 years. "Phoenix Police?" "Yes, I need to report a case of animal abuse." "No, not a current incident. 6 months of incidents. My name is Eleanor Whitman, retired FBI, badge number." She spoke clearly, methodically, building the case as she'd been trained to do 4 decades ago. Outside her window, she could see the veterinary clinic where Grace Thompson fought to save what Marcus Sullivan had tried to destroy. She could see the garbage truck still idling by the dumpster, the driver pacing and checking his watch. She could see the black Mercedes pulling into the clinic lot, Marcus Sullivan stepping out with papers in his hand. Eleanor hung up and gathered her journals. Harold had always said the hardest battles were the ones you fought after the war ended. Time to prove him right. The Mercedes's door slammed with the precision of a judge's gavel. Marcus Sullivan emerged in a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, his lawyer trailing behind like a well-dressed shadow. Through the clinic's window, Grace watched them approach, her hands still trembling from the adrenaline of Duke's resurrection. "Get Emma to the back room," she told Martinez quietly. "Now." But Emma shook her head, planting herself beside Duke's recovery crate with the stubborn set of jaw she'd inherited from James. Duke, despite the IV lines and oxygen, tried to lift his head at the sound of approaching footsteps. His body went rigid, not the trained attention of a military dog, but the cowering tension of prey recognizing predator. The clinic door chimed its cheerful welcome, a sound that had never seemed sinister before. Marcus entered first, his eyes scanning the room with surgical precision before landing on Duke. Something flickered across his face. Disappointment, anger. It vanished before Grace could identify it. "Dr. Thompson," his voice carried the modulated tone of someone used to controlling operating rooms. "I believe you have my property." "This dog requires emergency medical treatment," Grace replied, moving to block his view of Duke. "He's in critical condition." "Which is why I'm here." Marcus produced a leather folder, extracting documents with practiced efficiency. "Bill of sale from the military auction 6 months ago. Microchip registration transferred to my name. Vaccination records. Everything perfectly legal." The lawyer, a thin man who looked like he subsisted entirely on coffee and billable hours, stepped forward. "Dr. Thompson, we understand this is an emotional situation, but the law is clear. Mr. Sullivan owns this animal and has the right to make decisions about its care, including humane euthanasia if necessary. Euthanasia? The word exploded from Grace. This dog was dying in a dumpster. A misunderstanding, Marcus said smoothly. My groundskeeper was disposing of the dog's old bedding. The dog must have crawled inside while he stepped away. Naturally, I'm horrified by the mistake. It was such a perfectly crafted lie that Grace felt her stomach turn. Behind her, Duke whimpered, the first sound of distress he'd made since arriving. Emma's hand tightened on his crate. Regardless, the lawyer continued, we need the dog returned immediately. Mr. Sullivan has arranged for private veterinary care. He can't be moved. Martinez stepped forward, his usual deference replaced by quiet steel. His temperature was 106.8 when he arrived. Moving him now would be... I'll be the judge of that. Marcus moved toward Duke's crate, and everything happened at once. Duke erupted in panic, IV lines tearing as he tried to retreat through the back of the crate. Emma threw herself between Marcus and the dog, her small body a fierce barrier. And Eleanor Whitman walked through the door, leather journal clutched to her chest like armor. Mr. Sullivan, Eleanor's voice cut through the chaos with FBI-trained authority. We need to talk about June 15th. Marcus froze mid-step. His lawyer started to speak, but Eleanor continued, her words precise as evidence tags. 3:47 a.m. You took Duke to your garage. You had a blowtorch, the kind used for culinary purposes. I have photographs of the burns on his left flank, documented healing patterns that match. You spied on me? Marcus's controlled facade cracked. You crazy old bat, you... I'm a chronic insomniac with a view of your property, Eleanor replied calmly. I watch everyone, but you, Mr. Sullivan, gave me the most to document. She opened the journal, pages filled with her meticulous handwriting, sketches in the margins. July 2nd, withheld water for 16 hours. July 9th, confinement in a crate too small for turning. July 15th. Stop! The word came out strangled. Marcus's hands clenched and unclenched, a surgeon's hands with nothing left to fix. You don't understand. The dog... He wouldn't... Wouldn't what? Grace demanded. Break? Submit? Give up his dignity? He wouldn't stop looking at me. The confession erupted like pus from a wound. Those eyes, always watching, always judging, like he knew, like he could see. Tommy. Everyone turned. The lawyer had gone pale, backing toward the door. Marcus, we should go. Now. But Marcus seemed to have forgotten anyone else existed. His gaze fixed on Duke, who despite his terror had shifted to protect Emma, weak body forming a barrier between child and threat. My son loved dogs, Marcus said, his voice hollow, begged for one every birthday. I always said no, too messy, too much responsibility. If he'd had a dog that day, maybe it would have barked. Maybe Linda would have noticed sooner. Maybe. Your son's death was ruled accidental drowning, Eleanor said quietly. July 4th, 2019. You were intoxicated at a neighborhood party. I was on call. The words ripped out of him. 2 beers. That's all. 2 beers over 4 hours. I could have operated. I could have saved him if I'd been watching, if I'd been there instead of performing emergency surgery on another child, Eleanor finished. I read the reports, Mr. Sullivan. You saved a 6-year-old's life that day. While you were saving her, your son... Don't! Marcus's voice broke. Don't you dare make excuses for me. Linda didn't. Her note was very clear about whose fault it was. Grace felt the air shift in the room, tragedy layering over tragedy like sediment. Duke had stopped cowering, his amber eyes fixed on Marcus with something that might have been recognition or pity. Is that why? Grace asked. You hurt Duke because he wouldn't let you? I thought—" Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I thought if I could break something that strong, maybe I could break the part of me that failed Tommy." But he wouldn't break. Every morning, 6 a.m., attention position. Every night, watching the door, waiting for someone who'd never come. Just like I wait for Tommy to walk through the door and tell me it was all a bad dream. The silence stretched until Emma moved. She pulled her drawing pad from her backpack, flipping through pages until she found what she wanted. She held it up, a soldier, a dog, and a small boy with angel wings, all standing together under a rainbow. Marcus stared at the drawing, his face crumbling. He would have been 12, would have loved Duke, would have— "Mr. Sullivan," Eleanor said gently. Duke's handler was Sergeant James Thompson. This is his widow, Grace. His daughter, Emma. The soldier Duke waits for every morning died 3 years ago in Afghanistan. Duke stayed with his body for 72 hours in 120-degree heat, refusing to leave even when the recovery team arrived. The leather folders slipped from Marcus's hands, documents scattering across the floor. His lawyer was already on his phone, speaking in urgent whispers about damage control and liability. "I didn't know," Marcus whispered. "I didn't. God, what have I done?" Duke made a sound then, soft and low. Despite everything, the abuse, the fear, the pain, his tail moved slightly. Not quite forgiveness, but acknowledgement of shared grief. "The microchip," Grace said suddenly. "You said it's registered to you." But military dogs have classified handlers in their files. The sale should have been flagged. Eleanor smiled grimly. "Interesting point. I made some calls while documenting Mr. Sullivan's activities. The Pentagon has questions about how a dog with Duke's classification ended up in civilian hands. Apparently, there was a clerical error. Duke was never supposed to be sold." The lawyer's phone conversation grew more frantic. Marcus stood frozen, staring at Duke as if seeing him for the first time. "He protected her," Marcus said, voice wondering. "Even terrified, even after everything he still protected the child." "That's what he does," Grace said simply. "It's who he is, who you tried to destroy. I want to make this right." Marcus looked desperate now, the controlled surgeon's mask completely gone. "The medical bills, I'll pay for everything, the best care, whatever he needs." "Your money won't fix this," Grace said coldly. "Duke needs more than medical care. He needs to remember he's safe. He needs to heal from what you did to him, and that's going to take time you stole from him." Martinez cleared his throat. "The police are here." Through the window, 2 patrol cars had joined the Mercedes in the parking lot. Eleanor tucked her journal under her arm with satisfaction. "I believe they'll want to speak with you, Mr. Sullivan. 47 documented incidents over 6 months. In Arizona, that's a Class 5 felony per count." The door chimed again as officers entered. The cheerful sound seemed to mock the gravity of the moment. Marcus didn't resist as they read his rights, didn't protest as they led him away. His last look was at Duke, and in his eyes was something Grace recognized from her own mirror, the weight of irreversible loss. As the Mercedes and patrol cars pulled away, Emma did something unexpected. She opened Duke's crate and crawled inside, curling up against his battered body with infinite gentleness. Duke's tail wagged weakly, and he rested his head on her small shoulder. For the first time in 3 years, Grace thought she heard her daughter hum. The Phoenix Veterans Administration building stood like a fortress of red tape and good intentions, its labyrinthine corridors designed to confuse and discourage all but the most determined visitors. Grace had been there before, wrestling with James's benefits, fighting for coverage that never quite covered enough. But today felt different. Today, she wasn't asking for help for the dead. Colonel Sarah Mitchell looked nothing like Grace had imagined. Where Grace expected military stiffness, she found laugh lines and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. The office walls displayed not medals but photographs, soldiers with their dogs, moments of connection frozen in time. "Duke's file is unusual," the colonel said, spreading classified documents across her desk. "Your husband never mentioned Duke in his letters?" James compartmentalized everything. His family, his service. He kept them in separate boxes. Grace touched the photograph they'd found with Duke. "I think he was protecting us from the weight of it." "That sounds like Thompson." Mitchell's smile was sad. "He volunteered Duke for our experimental program in 2019. We were developing enhanced training protocols for PTSD detection and intervention. The goal was to create dogs who could identify and prevent veteran suicides." The words hung in the air like unexploded ordnance. Grace thought of the 22 veterans who took their lives each day, of James's battle brothers who'd come home only to lose the war in their own minds. "Duke excelled beyond our wildest expectations," Mitchell continued. "Too well, actually. He didn't just detect trauma, he absorbed it. We'd never seen anything like it. He'd mirror the emotional states of his handlers, take on their pain like a sponge. We tried to recalibrate his training, but you can't train away empathy," Grace finished. "Exactly. Thompson refused to let us retire Duke, said they needed each other. And the data supported it. Thompson's PTSD markers improved dramatically with Duke at his side until Helmand Province, the ambush," Mitchell nodded. "Duke located the IED, saved the entire unit. But Thompson..." She pulled out a report, pages thick with redacted black lines. "Duke stayed with him for 72 hours. Temperature hit 122 degrees. The recovery team said Duke had positioned himself to shade Thompson's body, wouldn't let anyone close until they proved they were there to bring Thompson home." Grace's vision blurred. She'd known the basic facts, but hearing the details painted a picture of loyalty that transcended training. "Duke was supposed to be retired to Thompson's family," Mitchell said. "But somewhere between Afghanistan and stateside, paperwork got misfiled. He ended up in the auction system. We've been looking for him for 2 years. Marcus Sullivan bought him 6 months ago," Grace said. "And spent every day since trying to break him." Mitchell's expression hardened. "We're aware Ms. Whitman's documentation has been thorough. The Pentagon is very interested in Mr. Sullivan's case. A military working dog of Duke's caliber represents a significant national investment." "He's not just an investment," Grace said sharply. "He's family." "I know." Mitchell's voice gentled. "Which is why I'm here with an offer. Duke requires extensive rehabilitation. The military has resources, veterinary specialists, behavioral therapists, facilities designed for traumatized service dogs. We can provide everything he needs." "What's the catch?" "If Duke recovers, he returns to service. Not overseas, he's aged out of combat duty. But the Veteran Suicide Prevention Program needs dogs like him. He could save lives, Mrs. Thompson. It's what he was trained for." What Thompson wanted him to do. Grace thought of Duke curled around Emma in the recovery crate, of the way he'd tried to protect her even while dying. "I need to think about it." "Of course. But Grace?" Mitchell leaned forward. "Duke's condition is deteriorating. Whatever decision you make, it needs to be soon." The drive back to the clinic felt endless. Grace found Eleanor in the waiting room, teaching Emma to sketch Duke's portrait with FBI-trained precision. "See how his ears tell you what he's thinking?" Eleanor guided Emma's hand. "Forward means alert, back means worried. Duke's left ear never quite straightens. Old injury. Makes him unique." Emma nodded solemnly, adding careful lines to her drawing. Since yesterday, she'd stayed within arm's reach of Duke, communicating through touches and gestures what her voice couldn't say. "The Pentagon?" Eleanor asked without looking up. "They want him back. Say they can fix him. But then he goes back to service. Saves other veterans, leaves us. Eleanor set down her pencil. Harold used to say the hardest part of loving a service dog was knowing they belong to something bigger than any one family. They're born to serve. It's coded in their bones. Martinez emerged from the treatment room, exhaustion etched in every line. He's stable, but barely. The infection's spreading despite antibiotics. His kidneys are showing stress. And Grace? There's evidence of neurological damage. The beatings, the prolonged hyperthermia, his brain's taken hits we can't fully assess yet. The military has specialists, Grace said hollowly. Resources we don't. Then why do you look like someone's asking you to cut off your arm? Because that's what it felt like. Duke had arrived in a trash-filled dumpster carrying the last piece of James she didn't know existed. Letting him go felt like losing James all over again. Emma tugged on Grace's sleeve, holding up her sketch. She'd drawn Duke, but not alone. Surrounding him were shadowy figures in uniform, faces indistinct but postures speaking of need. At the bottom, in careful letters, she'd written, "Duke helps." "Out of the mouths of babes," Eleanor murmured. That evening, Grace sat beside Duke's crate reading James's letters aloud. She'd found them hidden in his footlocker, pages he'd written but never sent, full of stories about Duke she was only now understanding. "You should see him with the new privates," she read. "They arrive broken in ways basic training can't fix. Duke always knows which ones are hanging by a thread. He'll just appear beside them, lean against their leg like he's tired. Next thing you know, they're telling him things they can't tell the chaplain. He saves lives just by listening." Duke's eyes tracked her voice, golden in the dim light. His breathing was labored, each inhale a conscious effort. "I know I should have told you about him," Grace continued reading. "But how do I explain that a dog knows me better than I know myself? That some nights Duke's the only reason I believe I'll make it home? You save bodies, Grace. Duke saves souls. Maybe that's why God put us together." Her voice broke on the last line. Duke's tail moved just once, acknowledging her pain. The clinic door chimed. Grace looked up, expecting Eleanor returning with dinner. Instead, Marcus Sullivan stood in the doorway, no longer the imposing figure from that morning. He wore jeans and a wrinkled shirt, eyes red-rimmed, a cardboard box clutched to his chest. "The police released me on recognizance," he said to Grace's shocked expression. "I'm not supposed to be here, but I needed—" Martinez appeared from the back, phone already in hand. "I'm calling—" "Wait." Grace surprised herself with the word. Something in Marcus's brokenness felt familiar, like looking in a mirror of grief. "What's in the box?" Marcus set it down with shaking hands. Inside were toys, pristine despite their age, action figures, Legos, and at the bottom a stuffed German shepherd worn soft with love. "Tommy's," Marcus said unnecessarily. "I thought Duke should have them. Tommy would have wanted—" He stopped, struggling. "I've been seeing him, Tommy, in dreams, asking why Daddy hurt the doggy. I tell him I don't know. That's the worst part. I don't know why I became this." "Grief makes us strangers to ourselves," Grace heard herself say. James had written something similar once about the men who came home different, hollowed out by loss. "I killed things because everything I touched died anyway," Marcus continued. "My son, my marriage, my career. But Duke wouldn't die. Every morning, same position. Every night, same watch. Like he was proving something I couldn't break." "He was," Eleanor said from behind Marcus. None of them had heard her return. "He was proving love survives. Even when the person you're waiting for never comes back." Marcus knelt beside Duke's crate, movements careful, non-threatening. Duke tensed but didn't panic. Progress, maybe, or just exhaustion. "I'm going to plead guilty," Marcus said. "Every count. And I'm liquidating everything. Tommy's college fund, the house, all of it. For Duke's care and training service dogs for veterans. My lawyer says I'm crazy. Maybe I am. But I need to build something instead of destroying it." He reached into the box, pulling out the stuffed German shepherd. This was Tommy's favorite. He slept with it every night. Called it Soldier. "I thought maybe it could stay with Duke, so he knows not everyone meant him harm." Emma had been watching from the corner, her sketchpad clutched tight. Now she moved forward, took the stuffed toy from Marcus's hands, and placed it carefully beside Duke. The real dog sniffed it once, then did something that made them all catch their breath. He rested his head on the toy, a gesture so gentle it seemed impossible from an animal who'd known such cruelty. "I'll testify," Marcus said, standing. "Whatever helps Duke, whatever makes this right." "Nothing makes this right," Grace said, but without heat. "Right disappeared when you lit that first match, but maybe something good can come from the ashes." After Marcus left, Eleanor pulled Grace aside. "That took courage. What you did. James would have done it. He believed in second chances." "No," Eleanor corrected. "James was a warrior. You're a healer. There's a difference." The next morning brought a circus. News of Duke's story had leaked. A war hero found in garbage, a widow's fight for justice, a community rallying to save him. The clinic parking lot filled with news vans, reporters hungry for the kind of story that made people feel something in a world gone numb. But inside the clinic, the only story that mattered was written in Duke's vital signs. Temperature still elevated, kidneys struggling, heart rate erratic. Martinez had stayed all night, adjusting medications, monitoring changes, fighting for inches of improvement. "He needs more than we can give," Martinez said finally. "I'm good, Grace, but I'm not a miracle worker." Colonel Mitchell arrived at noon, cutting through the media circus with military efficiency. She brought a team, veterinary specialists who examined Duke with technology the clinic couldn't afford, behavioral experts who observed his responses, a treatment plan thick as a phone book. "We can take him today," Mitchell said. "Transport's waiting. Full medical team. He'll have the best care available." "And then?" Grace asked. "Minimum 6 months rehabilitation. Possibly a year. After that, evaluation for service readiness. If he qualifies, he works with veterans at risk. If not, medical retirement to a handler of his choosing." "Of my choosing?" Mitchell smiled. "Thompson left clear instructions. In the event of his death, Duke's welfare decisions default to you. You're his next of kin, officially speaking." Grace looked at Emma, who hadn't left Duke's side, at Eleanor, whose journals had saved Duke's life, at Martinez, who'd fought for a dog others would have euthanized, at the stuffed toy Duke still guarded, a bridge between old pain and new possibility. "What would you do?" she asked Mitchell. "I'd remember that love isn't possession. It's wanting what's best for someone, even when it breaks your heart." That afternoon the transport arrived, a modified veterinary ambulance with climate control and monitoring equipment. Duke was loaded carefully, Emma allowed to ride beside him to the airfield. Grace followed in her Honda, Eleanor riding shotgun with her journals, ready to brief the treatment team on every detail of Duke's trauma. At the airfield, a military transport waited, its cargo hold converted to a mobile veterinary unit. Duke would fly in comfort to Walter Reed, where a team of specialists stood ready. 6 months, Grace told Emma as they prepared Duke for transfer. "He'll get better, then come home." Emma shook her head, pointed at Duke, then at her heart, then at the plane. The message was clear. Duke's home was wherever he was needed most. As they loaded Duke onto the transport, he struggled to raise his head, eyes seeking Grace. She knelt beside his gurney, hands gentle on his face. "You saved James," she whispered. "Now let them save you. And when you're strong again, you save others. That's the mission, soldier. That's what he'd want." Duke's tail moved, acknowledging the order. As the cargo door closed, Emma did something that stopped everyone in their tracks. She saluted. Not a child's mimicry, but a proper salute, learned from watching her father, saved for moments that mattered. Duke, despite everything, tried to straighten to attention in response. The plane lifted off into the Arizona sunset, carrying hope wrapped in fur and determination. Grace held Emma close, feeling the child's tears soak her shirt. But for the first time in 3 years, they weren't just tears of loss. "He'll come back," Eleanor said, watching the plane disappear. "Heroes always come home. Sometimes it just takes longer than we'd like." That night, Grace found Emma in Duke's empty crate, the stuffed German shepherd clutched to her chest. She crawled in beside her daughter, and together they looked at the sketch pad Emma had filled. Page after page of Duke, standing guard, protecting, serving. But in the last drawing, Duke wasn't alone. He stood surrounded by veterans, all of them whole, all of them healed, all of them home. At the bottom, in Emma's careful printing, "Daddy's mission continues." Grace kissed her daughter's head, breathing in the smell of hope and shampoo and childhood resilience. Outside, Phoenix slept under a blanket of stars, unaware that somewhere above them, a broken hero flew toward healing, carrying the dreams of everyone who'd ever loved a soldier home. The courtroom smelled of old wood and fresh anxiety, a combination that reminded Grace of church confessionals and hospital waiting rooms. Outside, October had arrived in Phoenix with its peculiar brand of desert autumn, still warm enough to sweat, but carrying the promise of cooler days. 3 months since Duke's departure, and the city had transformed their story into something between myth and movement. Judge Patricia Morrison commanded the room from her bench, silver hair pulled back in a style that suggested military precision beneath judicial robes. At 71, she'd served 2 tours in Vietnam as an Army nurse before law school, a history that showed in how she handled her gavel, like a weapon requiring respect. "This court will come to order." Her voice cut through the murmur of packed galleries. "The matter of State versus Sullivan, case number 2024 CF 7891. Marcus Sullivan sat at the defendant's table, diminished. 3 months in county lockup had stripped away the surgeon's arrogance, leaving something rawer, more honest. His lawyer, a different one now, public defender instead of silk-suited shark, whispered last-minute strategies Marcus no longer seemed to hear. Grace occupied the first row behind the prosecutor's table, Emma pressed against her side. The child held her sketch pad like armor, pages filled with Duke's journey, memories rendered in pencil and crayon, a visual testimony to love enduring. Eleanor sat on Emma's other side, 47 journals stacked in evidence boxes, her life's work of watching transformed into justice. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, "the state has received an unusual request. Multiple witnesses have asked to provide victim impact statements, including representatives from the United States military." Judge Morrison's eyebrows rose. "In an animal cruelty case?" "The animal in question is military working dog Duke, service number K94417. His status complicates traditional definitions of victimhood." A ripple passed through the gallery. In the month since Duke's story broke, Phoenix had become ground zero for a national conversation about service animals, trauma, and redemption. The 300 veterans gathered outside weren't protesters. They were witnesses to what Duke represented. "I'll allow it," Judge Morrison decided. "But keep it relevant, counselor. This isn't a rally." Colonel Mitchell took the stand first, dress uniform sharp enough to cut glass. She carried a tablet loaded with Duke's service record, newly declassified portions revealing the scope of his contributions. Military working dog Duke completed 1,247 missions across 3 deployments, she testified. He detected 43 IEDs, prevented approximately 200 casualties, and provided documented therapeutic support to over 600 service members experiencing combat stress. Objection, Marcus's lawyer attempted. Relevance? Overruled. Continue, Colonel. Duke's economic value to the military, based on training investment and operational savings, exceeds $3 million. But his true value? Mitchell paused, choosing words carefully. His true value lies in the veterans who came home because of him, who stayed alive because of him. She produced a folder, thick with letters. These arrived at Walter Reed over the past 3 months. Messages from veterans Duke helped overseas. I'd like to read one with the court's permission. Judge Morrison nodded. Dear Duke, Mitchell read, you probably don't remember me. I was the private who couldn't stop shaking after Kandahar. You sat with me for 6 hours straight, just leaning against my leg while I fell apart. I never told anyone this, but I had pills saved up, planned to use them. Then you showed up, and somehow it didn't seem like the answer anymore. I've got a wife now, 2 kids. They exist because you existed, because you made me believe I was worth saving. Get well, warrior. The world needs you. Signed, Sergeant First Class Michael Torres, retired. In the defendant's chair, Marcus Sullivan began to cry. The prosecutor called Grace next. She dreaded this moment, speaking publicly about private pain, but Duke deserved her voice. Mrs. Thompson, you discovered Duke on July 23rd of this year. Can you describe his condition? Grace's hands trembled slightly. Emma reached over, small fingers intertwining with her mother's. He was dying. Body temperature of 106.8, severe dehydration, infected wounds consistent with repeated trauma. But what struck me most were his eyes. They held this dignity. Despite everything done to him, he maintained bearing. Like he was still on duty, still serving, even while his body shut down. Did Duke show signs of recognizing you? Not me. My daughter, Emma. Duke had never met her, but he knew her immediately. We found out later he'd been with my husband when James died. Duke had memorized our scent from items James carried. He'd been trained to find us if anything happened. And finding you in that condition? Grace's voice cracked. It was like losing James all over again, but also like getting a piece of him back. Duke was James's final gift to us, and someone threw that gift in the garbage. Marcus flinched visibly. His lawyer touched his arm in warning, but Marcus seemed beyond strategic thinking. One more question, Mrs. Thompson. The defense will argue that dogs are property, that Mr. Sullivan had legal right to dispose of his property as he chose. How do you respond? Grace looked directly at Marcus. Duke bled for this country. He suffered PTSD for this country. He held vigil over my husband's body in 122-degree heat for 3 days, refusing water, refusing to leave his post. If that's just property, then we've lost more than a legal argument. We've lost our souls. Eleanor testified next, methodical and devastating. She presented her journals like a forensic expert, each entry time-stamped, each observation corroborated by sketches, recordings, weather data. The cumulative effect was watching torture documented in real time by someone trained to build unassailable cases. June 15th, 3:47 a.m., Eleanor read. Subject employs butane torch, commonly used for crème brûlée, to burn victim's left flank. Duration, approximately 30 seconds. Victim's vocalizations consistent with extreme distress. Subject appears intoxicated, repeatedly stating, "Why won't you break?" The gallery sat in horrified silence. Several veterans walked out, unable to hear more, but Eleanor continued, relentless in her precision. I documented 47 separate incidents over 6 months. Pattern suggests escalation coinciding with anniversaries, the 4th of each month, the date of subject's son's death. Mrs. Whitman, the defense attorney interrupted. You never reported these incidents. Why? Eleanor fixed him with a stare that had once made FBI suspects confess unprompted. I'm 72 years old, Mr. Counselor. I've buried 2 sons and a husband. I've learned that evidence speaks louder than emotion. So I gathered evidence, 47 journals worth. Would you like me to continue reading? What happened next, nobody expected. Marcus Sullivan stood up. Your Honor, I'd like to change my plea. His lawyer grabbed his arm. Marcus, no. Guilty. Marcus's voice carried across the courtroom. All counts. Everything they've said is true. Everything I did is true. I tortured a hero because I couldn't face torturing myself. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Mr. Sullivan, I strongly advise you to consult with counsel. I've consulted with my conscience, Your Honor. That's counsel enough. Marcus turned to face Grace. I bought Duke because something in his eyes reminded me of Tommy. That pure trust, even after everything. I thought if I could break that trust, I could break my guilt. But he wouldn't break. Every morning, attention position, every night watching the door, waiting for someone who'd never come, just like I wait for Tommy. Mr. Sullivan, his lawyer pleaded, I tortured Duke because I couldn't torture God for taking my son, for taking my wife, for leaving me alive when everyone I loved died. Marcus's voice broke. Duke took everything I gave him and still wagged his tail when Emma showed kindness, still protected her when he thought I might harm her. He showed me what I'd become by being everything I wasn't, loyal, forgiving, unbroken. The courtroom had gone tomb silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, transfixed by the raw confession. I've liquidated everything, Marcus continued. Tommy's college fund, the house, investments, $8.3 million. I want it placed in trust for Duke's medical care and to fund service dogs for veterans. I want Tommy's name on something that heals instead of hurts. That's very noble, Mr. Sullivan, Judge Morrison said carefully. But it doesn't erase. Nothing erases it. Marcus's shoulders slumped. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for the chance to build something from the ashes of what I burned. Duke survived me. Maybe something good can survive, too. The doors at the back of courtroom opened. An aide whispered urgently to Colonel Mitchell, who stood abruptly. Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption, but I've just received word from Walter Reed. It concerns Duke's condition. Grace's heart stopped. Emma's hand tightened on hers. Duke underwent emergency surgery this morning, Mitchell continued. The neurological damage was worse than initially assessed. She paused, reading from her phone. He suffered a series of seizures. The medical team had to make critical decisions. Is he? Grace couldn't finish the question. He survived, but the damage to his motor cortex is extensive. Duke will likely never return to active service. He may never walk normally again. The gallery erupted. Veterans who'd stood silent through descriptions of torture now voiced their anguish. Judge Morrison gavelled repeatedly for order. However, Mitchell raised her voice above the chaos. Duke responded to experimental treatment developed for veterans with traumatic brain injuries. He's conscious, responsive, and this morning at 0600 hours, he assumed a tension position. From a lying position, unable to stand, he still honored his training. Through the noise and emotion, one sound cut clear. Emma Thompson speaking her first words in 3 years. Duke keeps his promise. The child's voice, rusty from disuse but certain, brought absolute silence. Grace pulled Emma close, tears streaming down both their faces. Eleanor reached across to squeeze their joined hands. Judge Morrison cleared her throat, visibly affected. "This court will take a brief recess. Mr. Sullivan, I suggest you use this time to fully consider your plea. Court will reconvene in 15 minutes. As the courtroom emptied, Marcus Sullivan remained seated, staring at his hands, surgeon's hands that had saved lives and destroyed them with equal precision. When he finally looked up, Grace Thompson stood before him. "Duke's alive," she said simply. "That's what matters. I'll spend the rest of my life making amends," Marcus replied. "However long the court gives me. The court will give you justice. Duke already gave you something else." "What's that?" Grace glanced at Emma, who was showing her drawings to Colonel Mitchell. Pictures of Duke standing tall, surrounded by light. "A chance to prove that broken things can heal. That's all any of us really want, isn't it? To believe we can come back from our worst moments." Outside, the October sun climbed toward noon, casting long shadows from the courthouse steps, where 300 veterans waited to hear the fate of one who'd served among them. In a medical ward 3,000 miles away, a German shepherd named Duke held a tension position from his hospital bed, still honoring duty, still keeping watch, still proving that some things, loyalty, courage, love, survive even the darkest nights. The Walter Reed Veterinary Ward at midnight felt like a cathedral of suffering and hope. Grace pressed her face against the observation window, watching Duke's chest rise and fall beneath a web of monitors and IV lines. 3 days since the courtroom revelation, and she'd driven straight through from Phoenix, Emma sleeping in the back seat, Eleanor navigating with road atlas and determination. Duke lay still, except for the occasional tremor that rippled through his body, aftershocks of the seizures that had nearly claimed him. His left side showed signs of paralysis, legs positioned by caring hands rather than his own will. But his eyes remained alert, tracking movement with the vigilance of a soldier who'd learned that awareness meant survival. "Mrs. Thompson?" Dr. Patricia Chen appeared beside her, surgical scrubs wrinkled from a long shift. "I'm Duke's neurologist." "Colonel Mitchell said you'd be coming. How bad is it?" Grace asked, though Duke's stillness told its own story. The seizures caused what we call a watershed stroke. Blood flow to parts of his motor cortex was compromised. The left side paralysis may be permanent. His cognitive function appears intact. He responds to commands, recognizes people, but his body— Dr. Chen paused, choosing words carefully. "His body can no longer obey what his mind knows." Through the window, Grace watched a night shift technician enter Duke's room. The young man, barely out of his teens, wore the telltale 1,000-yard stare of recent deployment. He approached Duke slowly, respectfully, then sat on the floor beside the bed. "That's Corporal Stevens," Dr. Chen explained. "Lost his left leg to an IED 6 months ago, refuses prosthetics, refuses therapy, but every night he comes here." Stevens was talking to Duke, too quiet to hear through the glass. His hand rested on Duke's paralyzed paw, and Grace realized they were breathing in sync. Broken soldier and broken dog, finding rhythm in shared damage. "This morning," Dr. Chen continued, "Duke hadn't moved for 12 hours. We were discussing options. Then Stevens arrived for his usual visit. Duke heard his voice and fought to assume a tension position, couldn't stand, could barely lift his head. But he tried. Stevens broke down completely. First time he's cried since his injury." "Duke's still saving people," Grace murmured. "That's what makes this so hard." Dr. Chen pulled up Duke's brain scans on a tablet. "Physically, he'll never be what he was. The experimental treatment prevented complete paralysis, but he'll need constant care, specialized equipment, a lifetime of management. The military wants to put him down." Grace finished the sentence, recognizing the bureaucratic dance of cost-benefit analysis. Not once. But retirement for a dog with Duke's needs isn't simple. Resources are limited. And frankly, we don't know if Duke wants to keep fighting. Animals don't process disability like humans. Sometimes the kindest... No. Emma's voice cut through the clinical discussion. Grace turned to find her daughter in the doorway, sketchpad clutched to her chest. Duke doesn't quit. Ever. Dr. Chen knelt to Emma's level. Sweetheart, Duke is very sick. Emma pushed past her, pressing both hands against the observation window. Beyond the glass, Duke's ear twitched. The good one. The one not scarred by saving lives. His head turned slightly, eyes finding Emma through barrier and distance. Duke's tail moved. Not the enthusiastic wag of a healthy dog, but a deliberate, painful slide across sterile sheets. Morse code of recognition and joy despite everything. Stevens looked up, saw them watching. He stood awkwardly on his remaining leg, opened the door. "He's been waiting," Stevens said simply. "Heard him whining in his sleep. Kept saying a name. Emma?" Emma didn't need further invitation. She moved to Duke's bedside with the confidence of a child who'd spent 3 years in silence, learning to read the unspoken. Her small hands found the spots that still had feeling, gentle touches that made Duke's eyes close in something like peace. "I brought your friend," Emma whispered, producing the stuffed German shepherd that had traveled 3,000 miles. She tucked it against Duke's side, and his good paw curved protectively around it. Stevens watched with naked hunger. He still protects things, even like this. "That's who he is," Grace said. "It's why we can't give up on him." "Ma'am, with respect?" Stevens' voice carried bitter experience. "Sometimes holding on is selfish. I've seen guys kept alive by machines, families refusing to let go. There's no dignity in that." "Is that why you refuse your prosthetic?" Eleanor asked from the doorway. She'd been quiet during the drive, processing everything with FBI-trained patience. Now she studied Stevens like evidence. "Because you think there's no dignity in adaptation?" Stevens flushed. "That's different." "Is it?" Eleanor moved into the room, joints protesting the long drive. "You're what, 22? 23? Whole life ahead, if you choose it. Duke's 7. In dog years, he's approaching my age. And I'll tell you something, Corporal. Dignity isn't about what works. It's about what endures." She pulled out her journal, latest volume in a lifetime of documentation. October 15th, 0200 hours. Observed Duke attempt attention position 16 times despite left side paralysis. Succeeded partially on attempt 17. Night technician, that's you, Corporal Stevens, wept upon witnessing. First emotional release documented since his admission. Stevens stared at her. "You've been watching me?" "I watch everyone. Occupational hazard of insomnia and FBI training." Eleanor's voice gentled. "You visit Duke because he doesn't pity you, doesn't see you as broken, just sees you as someone who needs company at 0200, right?" The young man's composure cracked. He just accepts it. The leg, the chair, all of it. Doesn't make a difference to him. "Then why," Eleanor asked quietly, "would his condition make a difference to you?" The room fell silent, except for monitoring equipment and Duke's labored breathing. Emma had curled up beside him on the narrow bed, sketchpad abandoned, her presence more therapeutic than any medication. Grace's phone buzzed. Marcus Sullivan's name on caller ID made her step into the hallway. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm sorry to call so late. I wanted you to know the trust is finalized. $8.3 million. Managed by veterans organizations designated for Duke's care and service dog programs. Tommy's name is on everything." "Marcus, I also wanted to say," his voice broke, "my lawyer showed me the courtroom video. Your daughter spoke because of Duke. After 3 years of silence, he gave her voice back. "I took so much from him, and he's still giving? How is that possible?" Grace watched through the window as Duke struggled to lick Emma's face, paralyzed body fighting to show affection. Because that's what love does. It keeps giving even when there's nothing left. The judge gave me 5 years. Could have been 15, but she considered the circumstances, the trust, the guilty plea. I'll serve every day, but when you get out, there'll be dogs that need training, veterans that need help. Duke's legacy will need hands to continue it. Silence on the line, then. I'd like that. To build instead of destroy. Do you think... Would Duke forgive me? Grace thought of Duke's tail wagging despite the pain when Emma had placed Tommy's toy beside him. He already has. The question is whether you'll forgive yourself. After ending the call, Grace found Dr. Chen in conference with Colonel Mitchell and 2 other officials. Their expressions told the story before words could. "The review board meets tomorrow," Mitchell said quietly. "Duke's quality of life assessment. I've advocated for continued treatment, but a paralyzed dog can't serve," one official interrupted. "The resources required could save how many Stevens?" Eleanor's voice cut through excuses. "How many veterans sitting in the dark, convinced they're too broken to matter? You want cost-benefit analysis? Calculate the value of a suicide prevented. The worth of a young man accepting a prosthetic because a paralyzed dog showed him how to adapt." Ms. Whitman, widowed. Like half the women my age, watching men make decisions about who deserves to live. Eleanor's FBI steel showed through. Duke's mission isn't over. It's evolved. He can't detect IEDs anymore, but he can still detect despair. Can't chase down enemies, but he can still chase away darkness. That's not diminished capacity. That's specialized service. Through the observation window, Stevens had awkwardly lowered himself back to the floor, his prosthetic leg stretched out beside Duke's paralyzed ones. 2 warriors adapting to new realities, finding strength in shared weakness. Emma looked up from Duke's side, meeting Grace's eyes through the glass. She held up her sketch pad, showing her latest drawing. Duke, in a specialized wheelchair, surrounded by wounded veterans, all of them moving forward together. At the bottom, in careful letters, different mission, same hero. "Give us 6 months," Grace heard herself say. "If Duke's condition doesn't improve, if he's suffering, we'll revisit. But if he's fighting, if he's still serving, just differently, then we fight with him." Mitchell studied her, then nodded slowly. "I'll take it to the board. But Grace, you need to understand, if they approve this, Duke becomes your responsibility. The military will provide initial resources, but long-term care, we'll manage. Phoenix is full of veterans who remember what Duke did overseas. They won't abandon him now." As if summoned by her words, Grace's phone lit up with messages. The courtroom video had gone viral. Donations pouring into Marcus's trust. Veterans organizing, planning, building something from shared purpose. Duke's story had become bigger than one dog's tragedy. It was becoming a movement. In his hospital bed, Duke managed to lift his head slightly, eyes finding each person in turn. The monitors showed his heart rate steadying, pain levels dropping. Emma's presence, Stephen's understanding, the promise of continued purpose, better medicine than any pharmaceutical. Dawn was breaking over Walter Reed, painting the sterile walls gold. Another night survived, another day to face. But for the first time since those seizures struck, Duke's eyes held something beyond mere endurance. They held hope. The truth arrived in Marcus Sullivan's prison cell at 3 a.m., delivered by a guard who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The manila envelope felt heavier than its contents warranted. 2 sheets of paper that would rewrite 5 years of guilt. "Your lawyer says it's urgent," the guard muttered. "Something about your wife's death." Marcus sat on his narrow bunk, hands trembling as he opened Eleanor Whitman's latest discovery. The old FBI agent hadn't stopped investigating after the trial. Her insomnia and stubborn sense of justice had led her down paths the original investigators had missed. Linda's suicide note, enlarged and annotated in Eleanor's precise handwriting. Beside it, another document, a life insurance policy taken out 2 weeks before Linda's death, beneficiary listed as Linda's sister Patricia. The premium paid from an account Marcus never knew existed, but it was the handwriting analysis that stopped his heart. Eleanor had compared Linda's suicide note to years of her journals, letters, grocery lists. The differences leaped off the page. Pressure points wrong, letter formations inconsistent, the signature a skilled forgery, but forgery nonetheless. Patricia had written the note. Patricia, who'd comforted him at the funeral, who'd helped him blame himself, who'd collected $3 million while he descended into hell. The second page was worse. Hospital records from the day Tommy drowned, security footage Eleanor had somehow acquired. They showed Marcus exactly where he'd claimed, in surgery, saving 6-year-old Maria Gonzalez from a ruptured appendix. The timestamp made it impossible for him to have been home, drunk, negligent. He'd been wrist-deep in a child's abdomen, focused on preserving life while his own son slipped away. Linda had been the only adult at home. Linda, who'd struggled with postpartum depression that never quite lifted, who'd been prescribed medications she often forgot to take. The police report mentioned her sedatives found by the pool, blood levels indicating dangerous interaction with alcohol. Details buried because Patricia had pushed the narrative of Marcus's guilt, and he'd been too destroyed to question it. Marcus pressed his palms against his eyes, 5 years of self-hatred crumbling like ancient architecture. He'd tortured Duke not for failing Tommy, but for surviving what his family couldn't. Trauma, loss, the aftermath of tragedy. He'd punished an innocent creature for his own innocence, creating guilt where none existed because the alternative, that sometimes terrible things just happen, was unbearable. 3,000 miles away, Grace Thompson stood in the Phoenix Veterans Center, watching Duke navigate his custom wheelchair for the first time. The device looked like something from science fiction, lightweight titanium frame supporting his paralyzed left side while allowing his functioning legs to propel him forward. It had cost $12,000, funded entirely by donations that arrived daily from across the country. The key is letting him set the pace, the specialist explained. Dogs adapt faster than humans to mobility aids, no ego to bruise. Duke proved her right, pushing forward with determination that brought tears to watching eyes. Stephen sat in his own wheelchair nearby, having finally accepted the prosthetic after watching Duke struggle. They'd become rehabilitation partners, broken soldier and broken dog learning to navigate the world differently. Emma documented everything with her sketch pad, voice growing stronger each day. "He's faster than before," she observed, "because now he has wheels." The simple logic of childhood, finding advantage in adaptation. Duke reached her and performed his signature move, the lean. His body might be partially paralyzed, but his ability to provide comfort remained intact. Emma hugged him carefully, mindful of the surgical sites still healing. "Mrs. Thompson?" A young woman approached, holding a tablet. "I'm Sarah from Channel 12. We're doing a follow-up story on Duke. Could we interview you?" Grace had grown weary of media attention, but Duke's story had power beyond their personal journey. Each interview brought more donations, more awareness, more veterans seeking help they'd been too proud to ask for. "Duke's the one they should interview," Grace said, gesturing to where he was demonstrating his wheelchair to a group of children. "He tells the story better than I could." It was true. Duke's mere presence communicated volumes about resilience, adaptation, survival. Veterans who'd refused therapy for years broke down at the sight of him, recognizing their own struggles in his determined movements. Children who'd never considered disability saw it differently after meeting a hero dog who happened to use wheels. Eleanor arrived with her latest journal and a strange expression. "Grace, we need to talk. Privately." They found a quiet corner while Emma stayed with Duke and Stevens, the unlikely trio drawing crowds wherever they went. "I've been investigating Marcus's case," Eleanor began without preamble. "Call it unfinished business. What I found. Linda Sullivan didn't commit suicide. She was murdered." Grace felt the world tilt. "What?" "Her sister Patricia forged the suicide note for insurance money. But that's not all. The day Tommy drowned, Linda was sedated by Patricia. She'd been drugging her sister for weeks, increasing doses, making her seem unstable. Tommy's death was supposed to look like Linda's negligence, setting up the suicide narrative. You're saying Patricia killed a child for money? I'm saying Patricia created circumstances for tragedy, then capitalized on it." Eleanor's face showed the weight of carrying such knowledge. She knew about Tommy's swim lessons, knew Linda would be alone with him that afternoon, knew the medication would make her sleep through anything. Maybe she didn't intend murder, just negligence she could exploit. But Tommy died, and she saw opportunity. Grace thought of Marcus in his cell, carrying guilt for a crime he didn't commit while the real perpetrator walked free with his money. "Does Marcus know?" "I sent him the evidence this morning. Also sent copies to the FBI. I still have friends there. Patricia Sullivan will be arrested within hours." They sat in silence, watching Duke navigate his wheelchair with increasing confidence. He'd adapted to his new reality without knowing the human dramas that swirled around him, focused only on the mission of the moment, bringing joy to a child, comfort to a veteran, purpose to each day. "It doesn't undo what Marcus did to Duke," Grace said finally. "No, but it explains it. Pain needs a target. When we can't punish those who deserve it, we punish whoever's available. Duke was available." Grace's phone rang. Marcus's lawyer, voice tight with urgency. "Mrs. Thompson, my client wants to speak with you. He's not handling the news well. He's asking for you specifically." Grace looked at Duke, surrounded by admirers, tail wagging despite everything. The capacity for forgiveness seemed infinite in dogs, limited only in humans. "I'll come," she heard herself say. The drive to Florence State Prison took 3 hours through desert that looked like another planet. Emma stayed with Eleanor and Duke, understanding without explanation that some journeys required solitude. Marcus sat in the visiting room like a man hollowed out by revelation, the confident surgeon, the broken father, the guilty penitent, all versions of himself stripped away, leaving only bewilderment. 5 years, he said without greeting. 5 years of hating myself for something I didn't do. I destroyed Duke because I thought I destroyed Tommy. But I was saving another child while mine died." "You still destroyed Duke," Grace reminded him, needing him to own that truth. "Yes. No excuses, no deflection. I took my manufactured guilt and made it real. Became the monster I thought I was. Duke survived what I couldn't. Carrying pain without becoming it. He's adapting, wheelchair-bound but still serving, still saving people like Stevens." Marcus's laugh held no humor. A paralyzed dog showing more grace than a surgeon with working hands. There's poetry in that. Terrible poetry. Patricia will pay for what she did. That's justice for Tommy and Linda. But not for Duke. Marcus met her eyes. "I need to ask you something impossible. When I get out, 2 years now with good behavior, I want to work with Duke. Not for forgiveness, but for purpose. I need to build something from these ashes." Grace thought of Duke that morning, struggling into his wheelchair without complaint. determined to greet each veteran who needed him. The mission mattered more than the method. Duke will be 10 by then, elderly for a shepherd. He may not. Then I'll work with the next Duke, and the one after that, however long it takes to balance the scales. A guard signaled time running short. Grace stood, decision unmade. Tommy would have loved him, Marcus said quietly. Would have seen the hero, not the wheels. Children know what matters. Outside, the desert stretched endless under October sun. Grace drove back toward Phoenix, toward Duke and Emma and Eleanor, toward a future none of them had imagined. Behind her, a man sat with truth heavier than lies, learning what Duke had always known. Sometimes the only way forward is through acceptance of what cannot be changed. In Phoenix, Duke was attempting something new. Stevens had rigged a modified harness allowing Duke to pull his wheelchair while Stevens propelled his own. They moved together across the Veterans Center, two wounded warriors refusing to let paralysis mean powerlessness. Emma sketched frantically, capturing the moment. Eleanor watched with satisfaction, her investigation complete, justice finally circling toward those who deserved it. The sun set over Arizona, painting the sky in shades of redemption. Tomorrow would bring Patricia Sullivan's arrest, media coverage, and the strange satisfaction of truth revealed. But tonight, Duke slept peacefully in his custom bed, paralyzed legs supported by memory foam, good legs ready for tomorrow's mission. The stuffed German shepherd, Tommy Sullivan, had loved rested under Duke's protective paw, bridging past and future, connecting all the broken pieces into something that might, eventually, resemble wholeness. Spring arrived in Phoenix with a burst of Palo Verde blooms painting the desert gold. 2 years had passed since Duke's rescue, and the Veterans Center courtyard overflowed with impossible reunions. Marcus Sullivan stood at the entrance, free after serving his time, hands steady for the first time in 7 years. Duke waited in the shade, silver now threading through his muzzle. The wheelchair had become extension of self, decorated with patches from veteran organizations worldwide. He'd adapted beyond medical predictions. The paralysis remained, but his spirit had somehow expanded to fill spaces his body couldn't reach. "You came," Grace said simply. Marcus nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. He'd imagined this moment through countless prison nights, but reality overwhelmed preparation. Duke's ears, one scarred, one whole, swiveled toward him. Recognition flickered in amber eyes, followed by something Marcus hadn't dared hope for: acceptance. Emma, now 11 and fully voiced, approached with Tommy's stuffed German shepherd. "Duke wanted to return this," she said, offering the worn toy. "He says thank you for letting him guard it." Marcus took the toy with trembling hands. "How do you know what he says?" "Same way Dad knew. You just listen with more than ears." Duke rolled forward, wheels whisper quiet on concrete. He stopped just out of reach, allowing Marcus the choice. The moment stretched, weighted with history. Torture and redemption, cruelty and grace, the long journey from darkness to this sun-drenched courtyard. Marcus knelt, prison-stiff joints protesting. "I'm sorry," he whispered, not expecting forgiveness, just needed you to hear it. Duke's response defied his paralysis. He surged forward, good legs powering the wheelchair, until his head pressed against Marcus's chest. Not forgiveness. Dogs don't conceptualize such human constructs. Simply recognition that pain shared becomes pain halved, that broken beings can support each other's weight. Eleanor watched from her bench, final journal complete. At 74, she'd found purpose in documentation, her FBI skills transforming Duke's story into legal precedent. Patricia Sullivan's conviction had reopened conversations about hidden domestic violence, about women who kill while playing victim. Eleanor's investigations had freed Marcus from false guilt while ensuring true guilt found consequence. "Time changes perspective," she told Grace. "Harold used to say, healing isn't about forgetting wounds, it's about choosing how they shape us." Across the courtyard, Stevens demonstrated his latest achievement. The prosthetic leg he'd refused for 2 years now carried him smoothly, each step steadied by Duke's presence. They'd become inseparable, the young veteran and aging dog teaching each other that adaptation meant evolution, not defeat. "We've had 1,400 veterans through the program," Colonel Mitchell announced to the gathered crowd. "Duke's warriors, they call themselves, each one learning what Duke teaches daily, that service continues regardless of circumstance." The numbers told one story. Suicide rates among program participants down 60%, therapy compliance up 80%, successful reintegration nearly universal. But the individual faces told another. Veterans who'd hiding in darkness now standing in sunlight, wounds visible but no longer defining. "Duke can't serve much longer," Dr. Chen had warned that morning. "His kidneys are showing strain. Maybe 6 months, maybe a year." Grace had nodded, understanding. They'd known this day approached, had prepared for it by training successor dogs, establishing protocols, ensuring Duke's legacy would outlive Duke's body, but knowing didn't ease the ache of impending loss. Now she watched Duke work the crowd with Emma, greeting each veteran personally. His tail wagged despite exhaustion, his eyes bright with purpose. Emma sketched continuously, capturing moments, Duke alerting to a veteran's anxiety spike, Duke lying beside a woman weeping into his fur, Duke simply being present for those who needed presence more than words. "He's teaching us how to say goodbye," Marcus observed, rejoining Grace, "showing us that endings can be as graceful as beginnings." The ceremony concluded at sunset, golden light matching the Palo Verde blooms. Duke rested in his custom bed, surrounded by those he'd saved, directly and indirectly through action and example. Emma curled beside him, reading from her father's letters, voice strong and clear. "Some heroes wear uniforms," she read, "others wear fur. But the best heroes teach us to find heroism in ourselves." Duke's tail thumped agreement, the sound echoing across the courtyard where broken people gathered to discover wholeness, where a paralyzed dog in a garbage bin had become catalyst for nationwide change, where love proved stronger than cruelty and service transcended physical limitation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, inevitable decline, the approaching shadow of final farewells. But tonight, under an Arizona sky painted impossible colors, Duke slept peacefully, mission ongoing, purpose intact, surrounded by the lives he'd transformed simply by refusing to stop living his own. The circle was closing but gently, with the same grace Duke had shown throughout his journey from trash to treasure, from broken to beacon, from Duke the discarded to Duke the irreplaceable. To every one of you who's ever felt discarded by time, who's watched your body betray the spirit it houses, who's wondered if your best days are just memories, Duke's story is your story. This noble German shepherd, thrown away like garbage at 7 years old, paralyzed and broken, could have given up. Instead, he adapted his wheelchair into wings, transformed his trauma into purpose, and proved that our value isn't measured by what works, but by what endures. Like many of you who served our nation, who raised families, who built communities, Duke shows us that the mission never truly ends. It evolves. When Eleanor, at 72, used her retirement to save Duke through meticulous documentation, she reminded us that age brings wisdom that youth cannot match. When Duke forgave his abuser and continued serving despite paralysis, he taught us that grace is the ultimate strength. Your scars, your limitations, your losses, they're not endings, but transformations waiting to happen. Have you ever felt thrown away by society as you've aged? And how did you reclaim your purpose? What animal has taught you an unexpected life lesson about resilience? Please share your story below. Your wisdom could be the light someone else needs today.